Hi guys, Teddy Baldessar here, and in this video we're going to be doing a Q&A. I posed the question on social media, have you guys ask some questions. I'm going to answer them here today. If you want to be in the loop for other future Q&As, be sure to follow me on Instagram, Twitter. I'm pretty active across different social media platforms, but I pose a question on those different platforms. So if you want to stay involved, definitely recommend to go follow us there. Also, before we jump into this video, I just want to have this as a disclaimer. There's a lot of brands that are raising their prices as the turn of the year is going on. I think the most notable one for a lot of you that are watching is going to be Hamilton. As an authorized dealer of Hamilton, we get an understanding of when these prices are going to happen. So as of February, in the start of February, the prices for some of the entry-level Hamilton khaki field models are going to go up. So if you want to get these watches before the prices go up, for some of them, you're talking about going up $100. It's not going to be for the Murph or some of their higher end pieces, their chronographs, those are going to stay the same, but some of those entry-level models are going to see a price hike. So if you want to have the opportunity to get those before the price happens, I'd act fast. We'll have links in the description down below, but I'd shop quickly. Things right at the turn of February, we're going to have to issue that price increase from the brand. Now, our first question comes from Elliot. He asked, what do you think the next Rolex is? As in 20, 30, 40 years from now, what brand could explode where it is today? Now, there are certainly brands that could explode from where they are currently today, but you asked, what is the next Rolex? And to answer that, and I'm not a Rolex fanboy, I'm not somebody that will just automatically say Rolex can do no wrong, but you have to give them credit where it's due. Rolex has transcended the category of watches, and I don't think any brand will ever be able to replicate what they did in the 20th century. Now, the 20th century of watchmaking also was pretty much the golden era of watchmaking. So we're not going to see that be replicated in the 21st century by any means. Watches are different today as they were in the 20th century. So it was almost perfect timing and perfect capitalization on that timing, which allowed Rolex to transcend the category of watches altogether. Also, when you're talking about Rolex, what are you really saying is the next Rolex? The brand currently sits based on 2021 data. We're still waiting on the 2022, but I imagine this number is even greater now. You're talking about 29% almost of the total Swiss watch industry. And this is only talking about retail value of watches. This is not looking into the secondary market, which is a whole nother animal, which they also have a stranglehold on in terms of really leading the market, especially with this whole CPO program, seeing what happens there. They couldn't even resist how much they needed to be involved in that. Also, to give some context here, to give the size of Rolex, now, Standard Oil, which you could say is maybe one of the largest monopolies in the industrial world of the United States, and literally the government had to intervene because they were too large. That was 64% of total market share. Rolex is around 29% of the Swiss market share for luxury watches. Now, you're talking about half of that. You're not gonna see the Swiss government intervene anytime soon, but just to give you scale, one of the greatest monopolies of all time was around double what Rolex is currently for the watch market. So that, I think, gives some scale. In addition, you look at the largest automobile in terms of market share, look at Toyota, 10.5% based on some of the statistics that I was looking at. I might be wrong there, but quick glance, that looks like to be where they're at. Then you also have Apple and Samsung when looking at the global smartphone market. They're not even eclipsing what Rolex has in the Swiss watch industry, and those are household names in that whole realm. So the question, will Rolex always be as powerful as they are now? That is, I think, open for discussion. But will there be another Rolex? I don't think you can ever say there will be. Next question asks, does movement quality matter to the average watch wearer? Besides basic reliability and minimum performance, I am not convinced a $5,000 watch will have a materially better performance and longevity than a $500 watch. So you are generally correct. I would say that when the average wearer, so someone who just is looking to buy a watch, doesn't necessarily care that much about watches, puts on a $500 watch and then has a $5,000 watch, are they going to be able to tell the difference in terms of day-to-day function? Probably not. They're going to be rather negligible in terms of those differences. But are there differences? Absolutely, and we can talk about those. But one thing I will also say is I think you could keep snowballing this idea and devolve into, hey, why get a $500 watch when you can get a $50 quartz watch or a G-Shock? Why even get a G-Shock? I have a smartphone. I know that's not your argument that you're trying to make, but I do think that that's kind of the natural progression that you can go on. These things are not needed. So this is all gonna be an attitude of diminishing returns at the end of the day. But now let's talk about what are the upsides of a $5,000 movement versus $500, and then you can kind of determine whether or not they're worth it for you. One is typically power reserve. Power reserves in movements around 500, you're talking more around the 40 hours is the average there for a power reserve. As you extend up, you can start seeing more of the 60, 70, and sometimes even more than that for power reserves for those movements. The other consideration is beat frequency. Even if movements under, say, $1,000 have longer power reserves, are usually achieving this by slowing down the beat frequency in the process. Higher beat frequency typically is seen as more premium, but it also provides an inherent upside to the mechanical timekeeping, as there's going to be more of a gradual distribution of energy to that balance. Another thing you are going to get as you get up to $5,000 is going to be the certifications that typically come in these price ranges. As you get up to $1,000, that's where you start to see COSC become a real reality for movements and watches that are going to become available. And then at $5,000, I think a great reference is Omega with their master chronometer certification that is going to test up the movement fully cased up, temperature testing, shock. They have much of this documented on their website, but that is inherently valuable, I would imagine, for many consumers that might see value in having a more accurate watch compared to, you're looking at a Seiko or Miyota entry-level movement, ranges of deviation plus or minus 35 to 45 seconds a day. It's a far departure from what you'll get with a $5,000 watch. And then you have up modifications, components, looking at silicone hairsprings as an example to help against the defense of magnetism. Also regulating organs. This is a big one that people don't necessarily consider. Your watchmaker will definitely thank you for this. To fine tune and regulate, having a more robust regulating organ compared to those conventional little pins is going to improve the concept of the watch so you can fine tune and regulate it more efficiently. And then modifications to gear trains, escapements, double barrel systems. I think the most obvious choice, again, I'll go back to Omega, because you're talking about the Seamaster Diver 300 right around $5,000. That becomes the staple of what you can expect for a $5,000 watch. You're talking about a modified escapement, different pallet system, and probably one of the best developments in the 20th century for watchmaking by Dr. George Daniels, who is an absolute genius. And if you've not actually looked at how that whole concept works, I can actually link to a seminar down below that he did for the National Watch and Clock Organization. It's really interesting, and I think you'll get a further appreciation that, oh, okay, there is something that comes along with this as I do spend a bit more money. This also doesn't even get into the idea of finish, which I didn't want to dwell on too much just because you're talking about, will I notice the difference? You're not going to notice it when you have it on your wrist, but this is something that you could admire when you take it off and you have an exhibition case back. Those components on those $5,000 movements, if it is something that's more vertically integrated from a manufacturer that's producing these movements in-house, you then will start to see those fine components be finished, different bridges, base plates getting some perlage finishing, different heat treatment on screws and things of that sort. That is something that when you're looking at an Bosch movement just doesn't exist. So those are some of the things that come up. Whether or not it's worth it for you is for you to decide, but it really comes down to this romantic game. It's a game of diminishing returns, but if you love watchmaking, then I think you might see the upside, and also consider that not every $5,000 watch is created equal. So you are right on that. Next question is, and then we actually got two questions about this, and both of them got pretty good engagement. What is your opinion of Tag Heuer as a popular entry to the luxury watch section? Tag seems to be somewhat absent from your channel. How are their movements, history? Do you recommend them, and how do they stack up against the competition? So I have covered Tag on the channel before. I have, I think, several reviews on the channel about Tag. But do I cover them as much as other brands? Partially no, and it's not necessarily because I think they're bad watches. I think Tag is somewhat of a complicated animal. I'm a huge fan of vintage Heuer, and I think those are some of those beautiful just chronograph sports watches ever produced from that brand. Vintage Carreras, Octavias, Monaco, although not necessarily for me, it is an iconic design, and it is worthy of that iconic status and adjective. Also here in the United States, they've done a phenomenal job in distribution throughout the 1990s. People know Tag Heuer in the United States and in different parts of the globe. People also have the affiliation with the Tiger Woods. Like when I was growing up, I remember seeing that type of connection and Tiger Woods wearing his Tag Heuer watch. You would see the logo everywhere. You could almost say that, I would say from a casual watch buyer, next to say, a Rolex, Tag Heuer was one of the first brands that someone might mention in the US market that's just casually into watches. And honestly, I think their designs look great. I like the look of the modern Aqua Racer, the three-hand Carreras, some of the throwback Heuer editions that they've done with the Octavias, the Monacos, also the Carrera chronographs. They look phenomenal. The big question for Tag is just how they stack up against the competition. Several years ago, say look at like a decade previously, the market of $2,000 to $5,000 was a different world. Tudor was not even active in the world, but now you have them getting involved. You have Oris, who's now producing their own caliber 400 movements. You then can look at Longines, who's continuing to do a good job. You have brands like a Nomos that's coming out of nowhere and in the past 30 years become one of the better success stories in watchmaking. Zinn, of course, is right there, although a very different style, but still a watch to consider in the price range. And you also will have brands like Bell & Ross, which from a design standpoint do a really nice job and still fall in that range, and from a movement standpoint compete directly with Tag Heuer. So that is a big challenge for Tag Heuer, is just the competition now. The other challenge I think for Tag Heuer ultimately is just how do they stack up against a Tudor? If you do the checklist, I know what you guys do. You guys will leave comments and say, hey, I don't want to look at this. Why I would just get a Tudor because it has the 70-hour power reserve, it has a manufactured movement. Longines, same thing. So I don't necessarily think Tag makes bad watches. I just think that the market has changed so dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years in that $2,000 to $5,000 segment that it is making it harder for them to gain market share. And I think a lot of consumers in the enthusiast realm have shifted to other brands. There's a lot to unpack though with Tag. I think they absolutely have the ability to shift in and gain more market share again, because they have the #1 thing that brands I think are desperate for, and that is good design. Tag does have good design when they can lean into what they do best. Brandon asks, what watch company that went out of business would you like to see come back? One brand comes to mind immediately. Now, I don't know if they're completely out of business, but they are absolutely a shell of their former selves, and that is Universal Genève. The reason I wanted to mention this brand, and I was looking online because in the past 5 years, I've seen that they have like a website. Somebody owns the brand, but they're not really doing anything with it. And that brand has so much potential. When getting into watches, really like vintage watches. That was like one of the pathways for me to get into it. And vintage pole routers, tri-compacts, chronographs. I mean, these watches that they were making in the 20th century are some of those beautiful watches I think were ever produced in that 100-year period. Point blank. And that's a bold statement, but I just love the way that these watches look. They're timeless, they're elegant, mechanically they are beautiful. You have the design connection to Gerald Genta with some of the pole routers, and again, those chronographs were just simply beautiful. Bi-compacts, tri-compacts, then looking at their Big Eye collection, there's just a lot to like. This is a brand that I would love to just see go full at what they were doing well in the 20th century and just see if there's legs. You look at the last 10 years, one of the leading just heartthrobs within the vintage community under $5,000 for dress watches was the pole router. That watch was so hyped and has just gone crazy. I remember when you can get a pole router for like $1,000 for a good example. Now it's way more than that, of course, but the watch market has changed. I think there's just a lot of potential there. Next question comes from Take Your Timepieces. How would you navigate the conversation with a watch snob that judges your watch based on monetary value? I like the response right underneath this, and I think I've addressed this before, but this sums it up. Tell them to pound sand. That is exactly right. Don't even need to entertain it. If someone is judging you based on the value of your watch, they're probably a very vapid individual who has no sense of self-worth, and they identify with something that's an object on their wrist, which clearly even have a negative type of connection with that thing if they're just judging it based on their own type of self-worth based on monetary value. So don't even entertain them. It doesn't matter. Forget it. The other reality is the person on the street, if you even tell them that you have a $200 watch on, they're gonna be like, oh, you know, that's a crazy amount of money. Like, get out of the world that we're in, understand the hierarchy of what actually matters in life, and understand that this person that's saying this thing to you or judging you on this is just an idiot. For our following question, we have most popular luxury watchmakers were founded more than 100 years ago, and it seems like newer, heavily marketed brands focus on providing cheaper or affordable pieces. Are these bigger watchmakers simply untouchable? Are there any modern brands founded even within the last 20 to 30 years that you can think of that can break through the luxury watch market? So you are correct that this industry absolutely relies on credibility, heritage. They want to see that you have a name that goes back. At least that's what a lot of consumers will think about. But what we have seen most recently is just independent brands surging up and taking over the industry in certain segments of the market. Probably the #1, despite them being polarizing and just transcending and jumping up to the top heap of the watchmaking market, is Richard Mille. They're currently sitting 7th in total market share in 2021 data. This could change going into 2022. It'll be interesting to see. but they're just behind Patek Philippe. They're ahead of brands like JLC, Vacheron, absolutely huge numbers. We also saw this with Frank Muller. He had a very similar type of trajectory in the 90s, 2000s, and that brand was started in the early 1990s. Looking at some other trailblazers in the world of independence, FP Journe, if you want the classic brigade type of approach to French watchmaking, I think FP Journe is the living embodiment of that and making some of those beautiful pieces in the entire world without question. Then you have the eccentric creativity of Max Büsser and MB&F. They have become a brand to reckon with in what they've been able to accomplish over a short period of time. There's also been some more mid-market luxury brands like a Nomos, who since 1990 I think is one of the best success stories in all of watchmaking, now being one of the leaders in German production for watches and now producing their own in-house movements and doing some great designs that I think are very true and impossible to mistake for another brand. And even at the more attainable end of the spectrum, I think Christopher Ward is a great example of kind of stirring things up. Some of their recent releases, they're just on a roll. They've, I think, turned some heads in what they've been able to accomplish. They're still a relatively small brand, but that's a brand to look out for and showing how you can start from after the year 2000, start to grow a brand. Another one that I'll mention, I know it's a very polarizing brand in the United States. They have a good presence here where I'm from in the Midwestern United States, and that is Shinola. Shinola, despite what you think about their watches, I think they do some things really well, and they've been able to scale in just over a decade a $50 million to $100 million watch brand, pretty much in a segment that is very saturated of $500 to around $2,000. Our next question comes from, here we go, another interest of mine. Favorite pair of Goodyear welted boots? One second, let me get these. So these are probably my picks here. These are my Alden plain toe boots in color 8 shell cordovan, commando soles. You know, Alden, I've worn many other boots. I just think that with shell cordovan, color 8 specifically, they're one of the consistent brands that produced this year round with just shell cordovan styles in different colors, mostly black and color 8, but the color 8 just looks fantastic. These have, seen some good wear this year. Just go back to them time and time again. Commando sole. I personally like to travel with them quite a bit, and they're really versatile, and they always get comments. People just absolutely love these shoes when I wear them. And if you don't want another addiction, I would recommend just skipping that entire section, because I find a lot of like Goodyear welted boots and also watches, it kind of goes hand in hand, finally made things that can last essentially a lifetime. Nick asks, since you started, what has changed for the YouTube watch community, and what notable changes have you seen in the watchmaking industry? Now, I have a specific bias to what I will see with the industry at large, because I'm more of a digital-centric type of creator platform in what we're doing here. So that's really where I'm going to see the most change. I think number one that I've noticed just from YouTube in general is just how much more saturated it has gotten. When I first started posting videos, there was only a few people that were posting, and then there was like the second wave of creators. I think Watchfinder was involved, myself, Adrian, Jody, Jory. That whole wave was like the second wave of watch creators. There were of course some players that have been on the platform for a lot longer, but that's where things I think started to really open up. And then in the years to follow, you would see more and more, and now there are just so many channels that it's hard to keep up with. There's so much watch related content, and that was, I think, a response to just how much of a void there was and how much enthusiasm there was. When you have enthusiasm with lack of content, that's an easy opportunity for people to jump in and really optimize the passion, because there's so many people that have interest in watches and they want to talk about these things. They photograph beautifully. They're amazing to talk about. The enthusiasm is there, that there was absolutely a void that was filled by a lot of other people, and I think allowing us to just share and have a conversation about these things that we love. Looking at the industry at large, one thing that I've noticed specifically as somebody has a business in this, is more e-commerce driven, is just how much digital has just shifted. I mean, 2018, 2019, a lot of watch brands weren't even posting prices of watches online, let alone selling watches online. I think now with digital content, we have this instantaneous feedback loop and ability to get information to people in a much more direct way. So that's the thing that I noticed the most. Of course, I have a specific perspective on the industry compared to some others, but that's what I've noticed mostly in the past few years. Connor asks, what are your thoughts on brand ambassadors? Do you find them important for a brand to have? Do you wish brands without them would have them? Do they influence you in any way? Is it a good way to spend millions? So this is one of those things where you have to remove yourself from the equation to understand why is it a thing. For myself, do I buy watches because of somebody wearing something in a movie or a certain celebrity wears it? Is that something that's gonna put me over the edge? Absolutely not. I can say 100% confidence that has never been a reason for me looking to buy a watch. I mean, I was just watching that Knives Out movie and Daniel Craig had an Omega Seamaster 1948, which is cool to see, but that's not going to influence my decision in whether or not I buy that watch. It's cool to see. That's pretty much it. There are brands that do this well, and you have to understand their position too. If you're a mass market brand, say like an Omega, they're probably the most notable brand for doing ambassadors. You have to consider, what is going to get certain people that never would look at your brand to look at the brand. And a lot of those people that might have money that are looking to buy something cool, they might see it on somebody's wrist at a red carpet event. They see their favorite celebrity wearing it. I think Omega is an example of doing some of these relations well. You have the Daniel Craig, the James Bond. There's been some where they, I think, probably overreached a bit and there's just too many. I think you almost want to be more centrally focused, but you also run the risk if you put all of your eggs in one basket. You never know what a human is going to do. They are people that make mistakes, they do things, and you have attachment to your brand to somebody that made a mistake. So that is the dangerous thing with ambassadors as well. A brand like JLC does a phenomenal job. I think they've done great within film, Kingsman, Doctor Strange for some reason. I mean, I'm not a big Marvel fan, but it just kind of fits. And then there's also the perplexing ones like Tudor with David Beckham, which always feels like, is that, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like somebody would wear a Tudor. So I think there's a lot to unpack with ambassadors. I understand why they exist. Are they going to influence people like probably you and me as much? Maybe not, but they are probably important for some of these brands and they have to spend their marketing somewhere. Where else could they put their marketing that's going to have high visibility and high ability to maybe convert future customers in the future in pockets that they normally would never be able to reach? But okay guys, that is my video here today looking at answering some of your questions. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. If you want us to do more of these in the future, that's a great indicator as well. Also definitely check out TeddyBaldestone.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.